There is a moment unseen by human eyes, unheard by human ears, when a believer bows their head and heaven leans forward. In that instant, something shifts in the atmosphere, because prayer connects you to divine authority. When you pray, you are not talking to the ceiling. You are stepping into the throne room of the King of Kings. You are not making a suggestion. You are making a declaration of dependence on the one who holds the universe in his hands. The same God who spoke galaxies into existence, who set the boundaries of the oceans, who numbered every star, he bends down to hear your voice. That is not weakness, that is power. The world measures power by money, position, and influence. Heaven measures power by connection. And prayer is your direct line to the highest authority in existence. No gatekeeper can block it. No government can silence it. No crisis can override it. When you pray, you have access to resources that cannot be exhausted and strength that cannot be defeated. You may feel small in the face of your problem. The diagnosis may look larger than life. The opposition may seem louder than your faith. But when you pray, you are no longer standing on your own ability. You are standing under divine authority. And when divine authority steps into a situation, everything must respond. Storms respond, demons respond. Circumstances respond, because heaven backs the believer who prays. Prayer is the legal invitation for God to move in your life. It is the key that unlocks supernatural intervention. When you pray in faith, you are saying, Lord, I trust your power more than I fear this problem. And that declaration activates heaven's involvement. You are not abandoned. You are not overpowered. You are not outmatched. If you can pray, you can prevail, because the authority behind your prayer is greater than the pressure before you. That is why the enemy trembles when you pray. He knows that once you connect to divine authority, the battle is no longer natural, it becomes supernatural. And no force of darkness can withstand the authority of Almighty God. There are moments in life when your strength runs dry, when your smile hides the struggle, when your shoulders carry burdens too heavy for human hands. The pressure builds. The doubts whisper, fear knocks at the door of your mind, and in those moments the world tells you to push harder, pretend stronger, stand taller. But heaven says, pray. Because prayer turns weakness into strength. When you come before God honestly and not polished, not pretending, not performing, but broken, tired, and real, something supernatural begins to happen. Your weakness becomes the very place where His power rests. The tears you cry in private become the seeds of courage that rise in public. You may walk into prayer feeling defeated, but you walk out refilled. You may kneel down overwhelmed, but you rise up empowered. Why? Because strength is not manufactured by human will. It is transferred through divine connection. When you pray, fear loses its grip. Anxiety loosens its hold. Confusion gives way to clarity. It does not always happen with fireworks and thunder. Sometimes it comes as a quiet confidence, a settled assurance that says, God is in control. And that quiet confidence is power. The giants in your life may still be standing, but something inside you has changed. You are no longer intimidated. You are no longer paralyzed, because when you have been in the presence of Almighty God, you realize that the same power that raised Christ from the dead is available to strengthen your spirit. Prayer does not deny your weakness, it transforms it. It takes your trembling hands and steadies them. It takes your weary heart and revives it. It takes your limited ability and fills it with unlimited grace. The world sees someone who looks the same on the outside, but heaven knows you have been renewed on the inside. And when inner strength rises, outer obstacles shrink. That is why you do not run from prayer when you feel weak. You run to it, because the moment you admit I cannot, God declares I can. And in that exchange, weakness becomes strength, fear becomes faith, and the impossible begins to bow before the power of prayer. There are situations in life that look permanent, doors that seem sealed shut, reports that sound final, circumstances that appear carved in stone. The world looks at them and says, "Accept it. It will never change." But heaven is not intimidated by what looks permanent to you. Because prayer changes circumstances. When a believer begins to pray with faith, the atmosphere around that situation begins to shift. What was locked can be unlocked. What was broken can be restored. What was delayed can suddenly accelerate. Prayer introduces divine interruption into human limitation. You may not see it immediately. The walls may still be standing. The bills may still be on the table. The opposition may still be loud. But when you pray, you are releasing power into a realm you cannot see. And just because you cannot see it moving does not mean it is not working. God specializes in turning impossibilities into testimonies. One prayer can redirect a destiny. One prayer can soften a hardened heart. One prayer can open a door no man can shut. History is filled with moments when everything changed, not because someone complained, not because someone argued, but because someone prayed. Prayer shifts the balance of power. It invites the supernatural into the natural. It calls down wisdom when confusion reigns. It brings provision where there was lack. It releases favor where there was resistance. Circumstances that once controlled, you begin to respond to the authority behind your prayer. And sometimes the greatest miracle is not just the situation changing, it is the timing changing. What should have taken years can happen in a moment when God steps in. Delays can dissolve, barriers can crumble, paths can straighten. Never underestimate what God can do in response to a faithful prayer. The doctor may have spoken, the bank may have decided, the critics may have concluded, but there is a higher voice. And when that voice speaks into your circumstance, every other report must bow. Prayer is not passive acceptance of fate. It is bold engagement with divine power. It says, God, step into this, move in this, transform this. And when heaven responds, situations that looked unchangeable begin to bend under the weight of God's authority. That is why you keep praying, because what stands before you today does not stand a chance against the power released when a believer calls on the name of the Lord. There are storms that rage around you, and then there are storms that rage within you. The thunder of uncertainty, the lightning of fear, the restless waves of what if, and how will this end? You can be standing in a quiet room and still feel like everything inside you is shaking. But when you pray, something holy happens, because prayer builds inner peace. It does not always remove the storm immediately, but it anchors you in the middle of it. The winds may still blow, the rain may still fall, but your spirit is no longer tossed back and forth. There is a calm that settles deep in your soul that the world cannot give, and the world cannot take away. When you enter the presence of God, panic begins to lose its voice. Anxiety does not get the final word. The chaos that once screamed in your mind grows quiet under the weight of divine assurance. Prayer realigns your focus. It reminds you who is in control. It reminds you that God is not pacing heaven in worry over your situation. He is seated on the throne, and when you remember that, peace rises. It may begin as a whisper, a gentle confidence that says, "You are not alone." Then it grows stronger. This will not defeat you. And before you know it, what once kept you awake at night no longer has power over your heart. Peace is not denial. Peace is trust. It is the settled conviction that God is working even when you cannot see it. It is the strength to wait without fear. It is the courage to stand without panic. The world chases peace through distraction, through noise, through temporary solutions. But prayer produces lasting peace because it connects you to the Prince of Peace. It shifts your perspective from the size of the problem to the greatness of your God. And when that shift happens, everything changes inside you. Your breathing slows, your thoughts steady, your heart rests. The same situation that once made you tremble now finds you standing firm, not because the storm disappeared, but because you discovered an anchor. That is the power of prayer. It quiets the chaos within before it stills the storm without. It gives you peace that defies logic, strength that defies pressure, and confidence that defies circumstance. And when you have that kind of peace, you are no longer controlled by what surrounds you. You are sustained by the one who lives within you. Power is not proven in moments of comfort. It is proven in moments of consistency, and prayer is the discipline that shapes the soul when no one is watching. Because prayer strengthens character and builds spiritual endurance. Anyone can shout in victory. Anyone can celebrate when the answer comes quickly. But it takes maturity to pray when the heavens seem silent. It takes discipline to kneel when you are tired. It takes humility to admit that you need God every single day. Prayer chisels away pride. It reminds you that your success is not self-made. It guards your heart against arrogance when you win and against bitterness when you lose. In the presence of God, excuses fall away. Pretenses disappear. You stand exposed before truth, and that truth shapes you. Consistent prayer builds resilience. When you pray daily, you develop spiritual muscles. You learn patience in the waiting. You learn faith in the delay. You learn perseverance when the answer is not yet. And those qualities cannot be taught in comfort. They are forged in communion with God. Prayer teaches you to respond instead of react. It slows your anger. It sharpens your wisdom. It steadies your decisions. Instead of being controlled by emotion, you are guided by conviction. Instead of being tossed by every opinion, you are anchored in purpose. Character is not built in public applause. It is built in private surrender. The moments you spend alone with God prepare you for the moments you stand before people. The quiet prayers you whisper in weakness prepare you for the pressures you will face in strength. When temptation comes, when criticism rises, when pressure increases, it is your prayer life that keeps you grounded. And discipline in prayer produces durability in life. You do not collapse under pressure because you have learned to lean on God. You do not quit in difficulty because you have practiced perseverance in prayer. You do not lose yourself in success because you have learned humility at the altar. Prayer is not only about changing your situation. It is about transforming you into someone strong enough to handle the blessing when it arrives. The more you pray, the deeper your roots grow. And when the winds of adversity blow, shallow faith is uprooted, but rooted faith stands firm. That is the quiet power of prayer. It builds a heart that is steady, a spirit that is disciplined, and a character that can carry the weight of destiny. There are crossroads in life where the path splits in directions you never expected, decisions that carry weight, choices that shape destiny, voices speaking from every side, advice, opinions, pressure, fear, and in the middle of that noise, confusion tries to take control. But when you pray, the noise begins to fade, because prayer invites guidance and clarity. God is not the author of confusion. When you step into His presence, you step into divine order. What seemed tangled begins to untangle. What felt overwhelming begins to organize itself under the light of truth. Prayer turns down the volume of the world so you can hear the whisper of wisdom. You may not receive a lightning bolt from heaven. You may not hear an audible voice, but you will sense direction. A conviction settles in your spirit. A peace confirms your next step. A restraint warns you when something is not right. That is divine guidance at work. Prayer sharpens your discernment. It helps you see beyond appearances. It protects you from doors that look good but lead to regret. It guides you toward opportunities that others may overlook, but are divinely appointed for you. When you pray, you are not guessing your way through life, you are being led. And when God leads, He leads with purpose. Clarity in prayer removes hesitation. It replaces doubt with confidence. You stop second guessing every move. You stop being paralyzed by fear of failure. Because when you have prayed and placed your decision before God, you move forward knowing you are not walking alone. Prayer aligns your will with His will. Sometimes the clarity you receive is not the answer you expected. Sometimes it challenges your comfort. Sometimes it redirects your plans. But when God redirects, it is not to limit you, it is to position you. He sees what you cannot see, He knows what you do not know, and through prayer, He reveals just enough light for the next faithful step. The world relies on strategy alone. Prayer adds divine insight to strategy. The world leans on intellect alone. Prayer brings revelation that surpasses intellect. When guidance comes from God, it carries authority, peace, and assurance. And when you walk with that kind of clarity, you do not stumble in darkness. You walk with purpose. You decide with confidence. You advance with boldness. That is the power of prayer. It turns confusion into direction and uncertainty into unwavering conviction. There is a battle that most people cannot see. It does not always make headlines. It does not always leave visible scars. But it is real. It is the battle for your faith, your family, your future, your purpose. And whether you recognize it or not, you are standing on a battlefield every single day. And on that battlefield, prayer is not a decoration, it is a weapon. Prayer is spiritual warfare. The enemy does not retreat because you complain. He does not surrender because you worry. He does not flee because you ignore him. But when you pray with authority, when you call on the name above every name, darkness begins to back away. Because prayer releases heaven's power into earthly conflict. When you pray, you are not speaking weak words into empty space. You are declaring truth into a realm that responds to authority. Strongholds that seemed unbreakable begin to crack. Fear that once dominated your thoughts begins to loosen its grip. Temptation that felt overwhelming loses its control. Prayer pushes back. It pushes back against despair. It pushes back against addiction. It pushes back against division in your home. It pushes back against every lie that says you are defeated. You are not defenseless. You are armed with the power of Almighty God. And here is what the enemy hopes you never discover, that your quiet prayer in a private room carries more force than his loud intimidation in public. He hopes you stay distracted. He hopes you stay discouraged, because he knows that the moment you begin to pray with boldness, his territory begins to shrink. Prayer is not passive surrender, it is aggressive faith. It says, I refuse to accept defeat. It says, I claim God's promises over my life. It says, no weapon formed against me will prosper. When you pray, angels are dispatched, strength is released, protection surrounds you. You may not see the battle shifting, but heaven is moving on your behalf. And sometimes the fiercest battles produce the greatest breakthroughs. The pressure increases right before the victory appears. That is not a sign to quit. That is a sign to pray harder, pray stronger, pray with unwavering confidence. Because the war is not won by human strength. It is won on your knees. When you understand that, fear loses its authority over you. You stop reacting in panic and start responding in power. You stop speaking defeat and start declaring victory. Prayer is your shield. Prayer is your sword. Prayer is your strategy. And when you step onto the battlefield clothed in faith and armed with prayer, You are not fighting for victory, you are fighting from victory. So now you understand prayer is not a ritual we perform, it is a power we possess. It is the connection to divine authority. It is strength in weakness. It is the force that changes circumstances, builds unshakable peace, shapes godly character, brings supernatural guidance, and wages victorious warfare. Prayer is power. When you pray, you are not speaking into emptiness, you are activating heaven. You are not surrendering to fear, you are standing in faith. You are not accepting defeat, you are declaring that God has the final word. The world may shake, systems may fail, voices may rise in opposition, but a praying believer stands on unmovable ground, because when you kneel before God, you rise above everything that tries to defeat you. Never underestimate what can happen when one person decides to pray with boldness. History shifts, families are restored, futures are rewritten, miracles are born in moments of faith. Build prayer. Do not let prayer become your last option in crisis. Let it be your first response in everything. Pray when you wake. Pray when you decide. Pray when you struggle. Pray when you succeed. Pray until fear breaks. Pray until clarity comes. Pray until peace settles. Pray until victory manifests. Because when you understand the power of prayer, you understand this unshakable truth. You are never powerless when you know how to pray. Prayer is power, and power in the hands of a believer changes everything.